This morning, I want to talk to you about an invasion. Not a military invasion or the invasion of illness in the body. I want to talk about a different type of invasion. One that Bishop Barron refers to as the invasion of grace. Now, every day we make decisions, but there are some decisions that loom large, big decisions. They define us. They put us on a particular path in our lives. For example, the career we choose. Will we marry? Who will we marry? Big decisions, right? Well, the single most important decision that you and I will ever make is this. When Christ calls us to enter more deeply into relationship with Him, when you experience His invasion of grace, what will be your response? When grace invades, do you cooperate or not? In all three readings today, in the lives of Isaiah, Saul, and Simon, we see the invasion of grace. We have in all three stories as a model of the call of God, the response we can make, and the mission that He calls us to. In our first reading, Isaiah has the vision, a vision of heaven, and he sees God seated on a lofty throne. That's his invasion of grace. And of course, he panics. He says, "Woe is me! I am doomed, for my eyes has seen the King." Now, you may know that in ancient times, they believed that a human being could not see God face to face and live. He immediately recognizes his unworthiness. He says, "I am a man of unclean lips." And he's right. But what does God do? He sends an angel with a burning ember from the altar of heaven and touches Isaiah's lips. He's right. He touches his lips and says, "Your wickedness is removed and your sin is purged." You see, God doesn't choose the qualified. He qualifies the chosen. He makes us worthy. Then God asks, "Whom shall I send? Whom will I send to my people? Who will carry my message out?" And Isaiah responds, "Here I am, Lord. Send me." 3 steps. The invasion of grace comes. Isaiah has seen God and has heard his voice. 2, he recognizes his unworthiness. And we all do that, don't we? We all ask, "Who, me?" But God makes Isaiah worthy, and he makes us worthy. Step 3, God sends Isaiah on mission. Now, before Paul the apostle became that great apostle, he was Saul of Tarsus. He came from the city of Tarsus. And he was a Pharisee. He was a persecutor of the early church. And on January 25th, the church celebrates the conversion of St. Paul, his invasion of grace. And in Acts chapter 9, we read that Saul is on his way to the city of Damascus to hunt down Christians, arresting them and taking them back to Jerusalem for trial. There is a bright flash, and he is knocked to the ground, unable to see. And isn't it interesting that God would blind Saul so that he could see? A voice says to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" If that sounds familiar, it's only because it's inscribed over the doors of our church. You pass it every Sunday. Saul asks, "Who are you?" "It is I, Jesus, whom you persecute." So what's happening here? It's Saul's invasion of grace, isn't it? And that's why he refers to himself in today's reading as the least of the apostles. And legend says that after this encounter, Saul went into the desert for 3 years. Jesus invites Saul the persecutor into the deep, and out emerges Paul, the great apostle. So there's those 3 steps again. The invasion of grace. Saul is struck down, blind, and hears the voice of Jesus. Number 2, he recognizes his unworthiness. I'm the least of the apostles. Then he's given the mission and becomes the greatest missionary in the history of the church. In the gospel, the crowd presses in on Jesus on the shore of Galilee as he is preaching. Jesus climbs into Peter's boat. Now, this is big. It's huge, because encapsulated in that boat is Peter himself, of Simon himself. See, because he was a fisherman all his life. He probably learned to fish from his father, and his father learned from his father, and on and on. It was the way he supported his family. He took pride in it, and he was probably pretty good at it. So Jesus getting into Peter's boat is kind of like somebody getting into your car uninvited and saying, let's go. We'd all be taken aback, wouldn't we? Jesus says, put out to shore a little bit. And he continues to preach to the crowd. When he is done, he says to Peter, put out into deep waters and cast your net. God is always trying to do that with us. At first, Peter protests. You know what Peter is thinking? Lord, you're a preacher. I'm the fisherman here. But he gives in. He resigns himself and trusts the Lord. He surrenders. And what happens? It's the largest catch of fish that Simon had ever seen. The catch is so large that it begins to sink 2 boats, and other fishermen have to come and help. Peter is overwhelmed at his invasion of grace, and he falls at the feet of Jesus, and he says, depart from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man. Does that sound familiar? Haven't we all done that? Who, me, Lord? I can't do that. And you know, I wish the gospel could have recorded Jesus' response to Peter's words. I can only imagine Jesus saying, I know, Peter. I know everything about you. I know every lie you've ever told. I know every hurt you've ever caused. I know every dark thought that has crossed your mind. But I still choose you. He does that with you, and he does that with me. I will make you a fisher of men and will draw others to me. That very day, Peter leaves behind his nets. Remember, God does not choose the qualified. He qualifies the chosen. He makes us worthy. There are 3 different groups of people in the gospel today and in the church today. Those who stand on the shore, they love to listen to Jesus' words. They love to watch. They might dip their toes in the water now and then, but they don't dare jump in. Then there are those who allow Jesus into their boat. They might get involved and serve when convenient, but they remain in shallow waters. Then there are those who hear the call of God and dare to put out into the deep. The reality is that God calls all of us into the deep. This is why prayer is so important. Prayer is not about changing God's mind, but that's the way we pray. Prayer is first about learning to listen to God, to hear his voice, and to surrender. So when we experience the invasion of grace in our lives, we will be able to recognize it and respond to God's call to go deeper, to get off the shore and out of the shallow waters of faith and go deep. Then we can accept our mission, like Isaiah, like Paul, and like Peter, and say to the Lord, "Here I am, Lord, send me."